5. I think that's a good time to get started. I can remember, what was it, the 15-minute rule in high school or college. If the teacher didn't show up, then you could leave. So we're not going to wait the 15 minutes. We'll get going here at 5. So thank you all for coming. We're up to 31 now, which is even better. Welcome to I think this is the 3rd. Is that right? Community Advisory Committee meeting for the Interloop North Transformation Planning Study. I am Eric Frisch, Manager of Special Projects for the City of Rochester in the Department of Environmental Services. I'm kind of project managing this for the city, along with Darren Ramsey, who is the name that you see most often, I think, on things that are coming to or from you for this particular project. With us today, obviously, is the consultant team that we've engaged to assist us with the Interloop North study, led by Bergman Associates and assisted by a number of other firms that are all, I think, here today and represented. We're not going to go around the table or the virtual table and introduce everybody, because we'd be here for a long time before we even get started. So hopefully you can just go look at everybody's faces. There's a lot of smiles, and people are pretty excited to have me not talk and to hear more about what's actually going on in the project. So you can go around and see who's here, and hopefully everybody knows everybody, relatively speaking. And someday we'll be able to get together again in person, and that will be nice. I miss you all very much. A lot's happened over the past few months, and we've made some pretty significant progress even in the past week. And so we have some reports that have been drafts that have been completed, that we're going to review some of the findings there and talk about where things are at and where things are headed now with the project. Obviously, as you know, the pandemic has slowed things down a bit, but that doesn't mean it stopped us, and we are moving forward now. So I'm turning it over at this point to either Mark or Kimberly. Mark, all right. I'll turn it over to Mark McEnany from Bergman Associates to run us through the meeting. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Eric. And good afternoon, everyone. It's been a while. Thanks for setting aside your time. We have a wonderful turnout, 35 people on the line at this very minute. And I'm going to ask Kimberly to open up our PowerPoint to talk to.
I just need Darren to give me access to share my screen.
You should already have that, Kimberly.
It's saying I don't. Host disabled. Participant screen sharing.
All right, let's try that again. There you go.
Okay.
Okay, so what's happening now? Oh, there we go.
Is it working?
Yep, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, great. So as Eric had mentioned, we haven't been in direct contact with the Community Advisory Committee here in the last couple of months, but we've been active on the job, working with our team members, and we have some important reports completed in draft form that were prepared by our sub-consultant, Kimberly Horn. They're going to be presenting that information, the multimodal analysis and the market analysis findings during today's meeting. There's a lot of good information here. It's going to help set the compass heading for how we move forward with the study and vetting ideas and coming up with some metrics to measure against. Kimberly's going to, ahead of those presentations, Kimberly's going to revisit the community engagement plan, what we've been doing, what we were looking to do moving forward, recent activity, future engagement. And we've had a very active subcommittee that was formed, the Racial Equity Subcommittee. I believe they've had 7 meetings with quite a bit of content and direction coming out of that. And we're going to get an update on that and looking for input moving forward on that subcommittee's activities. Also, I'm going to talk about the project status and the traffic. We can go on to the next slide here. So traffic analysis. So, you know, when COVID hit, we were gearing up in March to do a very extensive traffic data collection plan for this study. And I know to a lot of people, traffic isn't everything, but it really is an important metric that we do have to measure and include in the study and use for baseline comparisons. It is a quantitative analysis that's required in any of these studies. And as you can see by this graph here, when the COVID situation kicked in, the traffic dropped off dramatically in the country on a daily basis, but it's since restored to about 85 to 90% of where it was pre-COVID as far as daily volumes. The peaks are a little flattened out, so we might not see the intensity of traffic during the design peak hours, which can be a good thing because then we can look to design for less vehicular traffic in our solutions, perhaps, but there still is measurable, quantifiable traffic out there. The next slide. So some of the nodes in the country bounce back to full recovery very quickly. They're more the rural parts of the country and areas that had more agricultural and maybe non-technology focused businesses and employment. New York State, California, the Northeast were a little bit more technical and able to work remotely. So we're lagging in the restoration of traffic, but we're still regionally, we're back up to about 90% of where we were. We're working with some data that Region 4 DOT has given us. This information on these couple slides here came from big data at a streetlight database. We're using them for some of our analysis, and they published a national report last month that had this information in it, and that's all the cell phone data and what have you. It's anonymous, but it gives you a real good indication of trends and what's happening both regionally and nationally. So with that, we have reinitiated our traffic data collection plan. We have about 90 distinct data collection points that we're gathering data on. This started last week. We're working with Lou Engineers, who's overseeing that process, and they have a subcontractor on board. So if you are out along the corridor, you might see counting equipment, tubes, radar detectors. There's going to be 3 to 4 weeks of data collection here, second half of October and early November. And we're not using this data in a vacuum. We did have a pre-coordination meeting with the local transportation agencies, DOT, Monroe County DOT, GTC, to see if we're reasonable in doing this and what we're going to, what assumptions we might want to make moving forward. So as we gather the data and we look at it and we compare it to historical data, we will make some realistic adjustments to that data so that we can begin to vet alternatives and make some realistic decisions. The schedule moving forward, we did lose some time here, several months, about 7 months of data collection, but we were advancing other aspects of the study during that time frame. So if you look at adjustments where we were going to look at maybe the end of the summer of 2021 to deliver our finished report, we're looking now at the end of 2021 to deliver our findings. So looking at this committee and things you might be interested in, we would think that getting together to talk about possible ideas and alternatives, that will begin right in January, start of the year. So there'll be some, I think, interesting and productive sessions ahead of us right around the new year, moving into the spring of 2021 when we start looking at ideas together. And I think that's it. Moving on, I'm going to hand it off to Kimberly, and she's going to give you an update on all the great initiatives we're doing with outreach. Thank you.
Great. And maybe before I start, Mark, are there any questions on the traffic analysis or overall project schedule that we can answer?
Yeah, I've got one about the counts. How are you accounting? I mean, we don't know what we're going to be dealing with respect to COVID through the next 12 months even. How are you modifying the numbers so that we don't end up undercounting traffic needs in this area?
Well, that's a good question, Heidi, and I wish you hadn't asked it. But there's a couple reports out. DOT has one, and the Institute for Transportation Engineers has another directive. And actually, Streetlight Data has another informative directive. Really, it gets down to a point where you have to compare the information you're gathering against historical data, and then you also meet with the local officials to talk about trends. Do we see a lot more new development coming that would generate traffic? Do we see other patterns? So that there's not like an answer that I can tell you we're going to exactly do this, but we're going to look at the information together and decide what reasonable and realistic adjustments should we make to that data for this exercise. Now, I would say what would probably happen is as time goes on, so we do this study and it is conducted, we do the counts this year, we do the analysis front half of next year. If things change and you get farther down the road, we might go out and take some additional future counts to revalidate that information to see if other adjustments are made. But we're very comfortable that we can get data that will allow us to make good ideas together, good solutions right now that will be reasonable and we can test. That's about all I can answer. Long answer to a tough question. Thanks.
Okay, so from a community engagement perspective, this obviously, I think we talked about it the last meeting as well, has slowed down a little bit, certainly from our original plan, also due to the pandemic and our inability to execute some of the original elements from our strategy that we had hoped to do. We have increased our presence online. So I know we did talk about this at some of our previous meetings, but again, please follow and share our social media platforms. We will be posting additional information moving forward, links to the draft plans that we'll be sharing with the group and other information to maintain interest, momentum, and continue to look for ways to reach residents and stakeholders. We do have our project website still active. We did talk about the online survey that we had posted onto the website. That survey is still live. We would love to get more responses to that survey. We do have 216 responses to date, although 88% of those participating do not actually live within our study area. So we would love to use the survey and be able to use the survey to understand a little bit more of the perspectives from folks that live and work within our actual target area. So those of you, that have relationships, are representing various organizations and associations, resident groups within the neighborhood, please continue to share and promote this survey as a means for us to just do some initial information and data gathering. And you can see here some of the other key points that we've compiled from that survey. So clearly a lot of car travel along the corridor. Most of those outsiders coming into the neighborhood are going to visit the public market, and a strong sentiment that beautification efforts are needed. We have been moving forward with some limited virtual stakeholder engagement over the past few months. We've had a number of one-on-one stakeholder meetings. We're continuing to work with and coordinate with local groups and organizations in order to start the conversation about the study, understand some high-level vision ideas that we can incorporate and think about as we move into the conceptual design alternatives. And over the course of November, we will be making a concerted effort to do more of this virtual stakeholder engagement again. So we do have it as a foundation as we start to utilize that traffic data and move into the concept design alternatives phase. At this point, I am going to turn it over to Brennan. Brennan is one of the co-chairs of the Racial Equity Subcommittee that has been formed as part of this process. And I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about some of the work that the Racial Equity Subcommittee has been doing. So Brennan, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Kimberly. And I'll say I'm more of an informal co-chair. We're an open group and we would love more participation from folks who are out there. I'm also a resident of the study area, but yeah, so we have the Racial Equity Subcommittee, and to date we've had about 7 virtual meetings. We have a pretty consistent group of core subcommittee members who attend, but we're always looking for more folks and would love to have everyone's input. Over the course of our meetings, we've had a Q&A session with the city historian. We've also had some subcommittee members working with the library and getting public information to kind of understand and analyze the history of the study area. We've done a socially distanced tour of the study area, which is really great, just to get perspectives, hear from residents, and see like on the ground the connectivity of the study area. And most recently, we had a presentation from the city on zoning code updates. And so we've also drafted mission and vision statements to kind of guide our work and figure out what we want to do as a group. And what we have is the subcommittee seeks to center racial equity throughout the planning process of the Inner Loop North redevelopment by examining the history of racial trauma caused by municipal planning decisions and crafting recommendations that create accountability and build authentic community. And then our draft vision statement is the Racial Equity Subcommittee aspires to redefine the city building process as a vehicle for reparations that provides for the economic, social, and emotional well-being of Black and Brown residents. And so, oh, sorry. Thank you. It's okay. So our ongoing activities and what we continue to do, we have folks who are looking into the historical context. There's a lot of primary documents that they're going through, which will be of a great help, I think, for the final report. But right now, our purpose is to create some guiding questions to help the consultant team think about and refine the data analysis and collection that they're doing. And then from those guiding questions that we create, we hope to create evaluation metrics that tie right into those that can help analyze the conceptual alternatives and work along with the different subcommittees, part of the consultant team, to make sure that we can offer any advice along the way. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Brendan. And then just as it relates to upcoming engagement activities, I did talk about continuing virtual stakeholder engagement. Our team is really excited about engagement with the world of inquiry, and we are going to be building on some of the efforts that have been already undertaken by the Hinge group. And I know Suzanne and Sean are on the line and have already been working closely with World of Inquiry and a group of students to really introduce them to urban planning, placemaking, and a lot of the topics that are related to the Inner Loop North transformation study. We're hoping to leverage some of that work that's already being done and engage those same students as we move forward with concept design alternative and really getting their feedback as we move into that phase. And then also as part of that, Bergman will be offering internships to interested students at World of Inquiry to give them the opportunity to work directly with us on this project, while also gaining exposure to the professional fields of architecture, landscape architecture, transportation engineering, planning, and community engagement. So we are currently talking to the World of Inquiry teachers that are really spearheading the efforts associated with the Inner Loop North transformation study work. And we'll be coordinating with them, and we'll be able to share more detailed information with all of you at our next upcoming meeting as to how that will all be undertaken. And then, you know, certainly at this point, we had assumed we would have already been underway with multiple public engagement activities, and the exact format of how we undertake these moving forward is still to be determined. Part of it will be based on timing and where we are with regards to the ability to convene groups, meet with people in person versus virtually. And as we move forward with those touch points where we really do need those larger public engagement opportunities, we will be reevaluating what is the best approach and technique to facilitate those efforts. So more to come on the public engagement side as well. And we're certainly open to any ideas that folks have around the table, and can answer any questions at this point, or if anyone has any ideas that they'd like to share, we'd love to hear them. And any questions for Brendan as well.
Hey, Kimberly, it's Andy Rouse. Just wanted you to be aware, there's a question in chat that says, how has the survey been distributed to date? What specific efforts have been made to get the survey to those in the study area?
So with regards to the survey to date, we have relied on, I know at the last meeting, we did ask for help of CAC members to help facilitate or spread the word within their networks in the neighborhood. And to date, we've really been focused on using our social media tools in order to get the word out. And whenever we are doing virtual stakeholder meetings with local groups, we are promoting the survey through that means as well.
I guess the only thing I would add to that is that if anybody in this group has suggestions on how we can get the survey out, please feel free to provide that information to us, either, part of this meeting, or if you want to just send an email off to us, we're glad to take guidance from all of you to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get engagement from the neighborhood.
Hi, this is Keisha. I asked that question, and I know COVID has put a pause on a lot of things, but maybe in the future or the near future or the far future, I'm not sure, it might be prudent to go into the neighborhood that you're looking to capture information from, or the rec centers or the neighborhood associations, or knocking on doors and things like that. Has that been a consideration?
Yes, and some of the virtual meetings we've done have been with neighborhood groups and neighborhood associations, and we have been reaching out to different organizations to try and get those types of meetings set up. So virtually, we've been trying to get some boots on the ground to reach local residents and local stakeholders. But as Andy said, and I'll reiterate, if there are any specific ideas or specific organizations that you have in mind, please feel free to email us or get in contact with us. Give me a call. We can discuss any ideas in more detail as well.
Yeah, it looks like there's some good ideas coming up in chat, so please feel free to put them in there as well, and we'll document them.
I noticed that the report said that there were no answers in Spanish. What tools have we utilized to get to the Spanish population, or was there an attempt to get information in Spanish?
There was an attempt, our outreach has been, particularly our social media outreach to promote the survey, was done in both English and Spanish as an initial means to ensure it was reaching a broad audience. But we've clearly, because we have not gotten any responses to that certain population group, it's clear that we have not been able to as effectively target them as we have hoped. So certainly, again, open to any ideas or suggestions on what maybe social media is not the best tool for that particular population. So if there are other avenues that we should be exploring or utilizing, we would love to get that feedback.
Sure, I'll be willing to help in that direction.
Okay, well, luckily I have your contact information, so it's official.
It's official.
Thank you for that. I will be in touch.
Okay.
Okay, if nothing else on that, I'm going to hand it over to, I believe, Lucas from Kimley Horn to walk us through the multimodal analysis findings. Is Lucas the right person to hand it off to?
He should be. This is Jessica. He was on earlier. Oh.
He's here. I think he's having trouble with his headset.
Well, Jessica, I hope you're ready to do this as well as the analysis. I don't think if Lucas Lucas is having trouble with his headset. I don't know if it necessarily matters whether we do the market or multimodal first. Should we start with? Oh,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect.
I apologize for that. All right, let me know in the chat if anything, if it doesn't come up. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lucas Muller. I'm with Kimberly Horn, and we are excited to be part of the team that's supporting this effort in Rochester, and specifically working on the multimodal accessibility aspects and what Jessica Rossi will talk with you shortly about in terms of the market research. So I'm going to start with the multimodal accessibility, and we're excited to have submitted kind of a draft of our initial assessment to the city. We've gotten some good feedback already, and want to use some of this time to present some of those findings to you all, and certainly willing to take any feedback that you have as well as we work to finalize that. As we prepared this analysis, we certainly reviewed some other city reports and previous work, looking at Rockville Riverway Plan, Citywide Access and Mobility Plan, Comprehensive Plan, and other ongoing initiatives. And the last time we met, which was a few months back, we had shared some preliminary maps of the different modal networks. And so today we'll be able to provide some more detail on the analyses that we've completed to date. So as a refresher, here is our study area as we've defined it as part of the study. You can see the inner loop in the middle of our study area stretching east-west. And it's important that we also consider the areas north and south of the inner loop and look at connections across the facility as well. And it's really exciting to hear all of the dialogue and the conversations that have been happening as part of the racial equity subcommittee as part of this project. And when we talk about multimodal accessibility, equity and racial equity specifically are certainly key considerations, especially given the historical context of this project and area. So some statistics we had presented back last time, just to give kind of a quick overview of the study area. 39% of the population in the study area under the age of 24. The median income is less than half of the city area, the city of Rochester average. The unemployment rate is more than double that of Monroe County at 10%. And we'll get into a couple of slides showing some mapping of race and ethnicity in a few minutes. But before we jump into the analysis, sorry, if you can go back one, Kimberly. But before we jump in, I wanted to highlight just a few of the ways that we are integrating equity in our analysis. We certainly welcome your input on this. And as was mentioned, talking about looking at metrics, that's certainly an area that we can collaborate with the racial equity group and look at that. The first is related to demographic data that's available from some of the travel trends and data that we have. Mark mentioned the streetlight data earlier. The second is through our isochrone analysis, and we'll get into that in a bit, but what that does is it basically shows you where you can get in a certain amount of time on a specific mode. And so looking at different destinations and choices. And finally, as we look through and kind of assess what the performance and what the strengths and weaknesses of our existing network are, we have certain metrics that we'll be looking at that relate to equity as well. So looking at racial diversity, we noted that approximately 45% of the population of the study area is Black, compared to 30% white. And when we're looking at how to address deficiencies in a transportation network in an equitable manner, it's also important to know not just the overall makeup, but where certain populations are. And so what this map is showing is kind of an interesting way to show that density. This is not individual people, and this is not specific houses or locations. These are dots representing, every dot represents 5 people of a certain race, and they are distributed randomly through the census box. So you can see the higher density areas of the purple dots indicating Black or African American populations, and you can see where those are concentrated throughout the study area. And it's important that we think about connecting all of these areas in our work there. And similarly, on the ethnicity side, this is looking at the Hispanic or Latinx origin. I should note that with the way that the census reports it, any race can identify as having a Hispanic origin. So it's a separate map here. So, and the purple dots showing the Hispanic or Latinx origin. On the next slide here, we have, this is related to the streetlight data that Mark had mentioned. So this has given us some information about travel patterns in our study area here. And the areas in red and orange, those are where some of the highest concentrations of trips being made during an average weekday. So this is not necessarily on the inner loop, but just anywhere in these zones. And what we see with these trips is predominantly short distance trips, more than 25% of the trips being less than 2 miles in length. And a lot of those trips we see that as potential to be done, be converted, by either another mode, walking, biking, transit modes. And we also see that kind of distribution of income, zero approximations, but a pretty spread out distribution of the income. On this is showing some other demographic information that can be found from the streetlight estimates as well. And this is again in our study area, that neighborhood, looking at the percentage of trips made by white individuals, you see is significantly higher than the makeup of the residential population. It's an interesting finding. So some of that background as we talk through our multimodal process here. Really our main steps were to understand what was out there, do our network inventory, map the different pedestrian bicycle networks. Then we did a few analyses in terms of looking at where you can go, how comfortable it might feel to bike, for example, on some of these streets, and then look at an overall qualitative and quantitative evaluation. And some of that, kind of those lead up to our conclusions of what are some of the challenges and opportunities as we look to develop concepts for the inner loop in the future. All right, so you've heard me say isochrone. What is an isochrone? Really, this is measuring where you can get from a certain point and how long by a certain mode. So whether you're walking or biking, we can use some of the GIS, the line work data of the networks to give estimates on how far you can go using a specific mode. So you'll see that for a certain number of points here. And for our study here, we picked 6 sites to look at kind of origin points for our isochrones. And these we wanted to select areas that were spread out through our study area. And we also wanted to make sure they represented the diversity in the study area in terms of geography, but also the makeup of the populations. So in addition to the isochrones, we also looked at a series of metrics I mentioned that assess the quality and effectiveness of the existing network. And these are really ways to measure progress against the study goals. So how do we, when we're looking at concepts in the future, how do we assess the potential benefits of the concepts in relation to what is out there today? Last time we showed this map, the pedestrian network showing some of the sidewalk presence as well as crosswalks at intersections. You can see a lot of A lot of the streets do have sidewalks on both sides, some more limited as we get closer into the inner loop. We've heard previously from this group that some of the concerns are related to some narrow sidewalks, especially for persons with disabilities, and also a request to consider seasonality, especially in the winter months, of how that can make walking difficult. So I want to share a couple examples of our isochrones from 2 different sites in the study area. And so I'll let you kind of digest this a little bit, but this is starting at the rail station. And the green, as we go further, it's basically showing how far you can travel in a certain amount of time by walking using the network that's there today. And one thing to highlight here is kind of, you can see it just if you go southeast of the rail station, you can see that some of that area is, there's less, it takes longer to get to those areas. And one of the big reasons there is that there aren't as many links through the inner loop there. And if you kind of flip to the next slide and kind of flip back and forth, you can see that also when we look at how we start in the southeastern area, also kind of limits some of that connectivity to the northern areas as well. So one of the things we can do also with those isochrones is give an approximation of how many jobs and population are accessible within 15 minutes of that specific point. So here's summarizing kind of the results for the 6 specific points that we've picked, how many jobs and how many residents are accessible within a 15-minute walk of those areas. I'll note that the last 2 on the right, those are ones that are north of the inner loop, that have less access to jobs. So to summarize some of the challenges and opportunities here in the pedestrian network, looking to try to avoid some of those longer crossing distances and make the pedestrian environment more friendly, look at shorter blocks and ways to connect, especially north-south across the inner loop, as well as looking when in the future to be able to walk along the inner loop in a way that's exciting and comfortable. Moving on to the bicycle network. This is a map of the current and some of the planned facilities. You'll see that there are some bike facilities, but also primarily in the east-west direction, and some connections to the trail network along the river, but certainly some opportunities for improvements there. The bike network here is shown in terms of the protection of the lane, so some protected bike lanes as well as standard lanes here. And we did a similar analysis to the pedestrians for the bicycle, and certainly, obviously, can ride your bike faster than you can walk, and so there's some expanded areas here that you can access within 15 minutes. And I think this is another one too. It's kind of representative if you really can kind of flip through back and forth here. You see the Y north of the inner loop, and then located south. When you're south, you can really get a lot more access to that whole trail network along the river, as well as other parts of the city. And so interesting to kind of see the differences there. And this graph is this is interesting, I think, to see the different population and employment much more even throughout the 6 points. And what this says to me is that it's really not a matter of distance. There are plenty of jobs and employment that can be biked within 15 minutes, but it's really kind of about the level of comfort and the ability to bike in those specific areas. And so one of the ways to highlight that is on our next slide, where we have shown something called bicycle level of traffic stress. And so what this is the yellow and red lines here are really, you can kind of think of these as the most uncomfortable facilities that can be used to bike. So the green and blue are more comfortable. This is based on things like the configuration of the road, how many lanes, the speed of the road, as well as the presence of bike facilities as well. So 2/3 of the street mileage in the study area is either that 3 or 4, that yellow, the orange or the red lines there, especially across the inner loop. So we certainly want to look at ways to connect there, looking at ways to connect to the trail network as well, and make it more convenient and accessible to be biking in the study area. In terms of transit, this map shows the existing network of bus service that's out there today, as well as the proposed redesign as part of the Reimagine RTS service plan. And what that will do is these yellow lines you see will bring increased frequency in service. So buses will be coming more often on those particular routes, strengthening connections in the study area as well. And can see here on the right with this is the showing access to a lot of the transit stops. So anywhere in green is service that can be connected to, within a 5-minute walk of a bus stop. So a lot of it is, a lot of the study area is accessible, but just looking at ways to take advantage of that more frequent service and throughout the whole portions of the day as well. And also as we think about other elements beyond just kind of the modes of transportation that we sometimes think about, curb space and parking is one that we see kind of a dramatic transformation in a lot of cities with the increase in delivery services, pickup and drop-offs from things like Uber and Lyft. And when we think about the inner loop and its potential, it creates a lot of extra space for utilizing the curb space in an effective manner, and one that's accessible to many uses. That's one piece. And then the next one is kind of about the public space and urban design, looking into placemaking and making the inner loop in the area a comfortable place to be, increasing access to parks and other public spaces. So I wanted to highlight some of those. I know we're running a little short on time, and I want to get make sure Jessica has some time here, but we are looking next to finalize our draft multimodal report, and certainly we'll be helping to use that information as we look to develop concepts for the inner loop in the future with the team.
Great, thank you, Lucas. There were a couple notes in the chat. So one of them had to do with the residential data in the isochrone slide, and a note that the numbers look low. Can you talk a little bit more about where that data comes from?
Yeah, sure. So that is the data is kind of from the census data in terms of blocks. And so basically you take those shapes that are developed from the isochrones of how far you can get and kind of do almost a cookie cutter. So you take that shape and look at which of the census blocks it's covered, and then you can kind of do an estimate. We will certainly do another check just to make sure that those are looking right, but that's kind of the process to get that information.
So the census data that you're using is how old?
I believe, if you can go back to that slide, Kimberly, I believe it's...
It was the first one that used residential data, that not the bicycle one, but the walking.
Yeah, so that should be 20. It's the way the census releases based on a 5-year time frame. So it's basically it's kind of an average of 2013 to 2017,
And I guess,
which is the latest that's available through the census.
right, but I don't know where that, I'd be curious to know where those numbers are actually coming from, because there's been a lot of development. There are a lot more people is what I'm suggesting.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure whether the census process is set up to pick up the level of development, new units and new residents. In the southern portion of the study area, which gets into downtown, it's just been a huge uptick.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and we certainly want to be using the most current data possible. If there are other data sources that we can use that's broken down like that, it's certainly something we can work with the city and look at.
And Lucas, we can maybe chat offline too. We use Esri Business Analyst, which can really get into finite details as well, that pulls numbers from a variety of sources. So maybe we can work with you and see how those numbers match up to what's currently shown.
Sounds great.
Okay, great. Thanks, Heidi. There are a couple other notes referencing in the chat, just suggesting maybe a couple other starting point, destination points for some of the analysis work. So we will certainly take that into account. And then the draft multimodal accessibility report and the draft market analysis will be provided to all CAC members after this meeting. So you will have the full draft reports to review after this afternoon. Okay, so with that, any other questions that maybe weren't in the chat that anyone has for Lucas?
I have a question about School 58, and some of it looks like it's talked to as a park as opposed to a building, and that it really does have a big impact on both sides of the inner loop, because we have bus traffic, parent traffic, etc. when the school is in progress, as well as it employs a lot of people there, and so traffic comes in and out of town there. And I'm not sure when I looked at the map that it was actually included in that. Just a point to look at. I'm just
double check that. Okay, so with that, I will hand it over to Jessica. Thank you, Lucas.
Yes, thank you, Lucas and Kimberly. And everybody can be thankful on this Friday afternoon that Lucas's headphones started working and that I didn't have to present the multimodal. Much better at this piece. Kimberly, you can go to the next slide. Just to give you kind of a little overview of our process. In looking back at what we've presented to this group in the previous two meetings, I wanted to try to focus more on the new information that was completed since the CAC meeting #2. And so some of the stuff that we had shared before was kind of the demographic and employment information that we had compiled, including quite a bit of information about social equity, which you will see in the report itself and very closely mimics a lot of the things that Lucas had shared in terms of his dot density maps. And we'd also at the last meeting had shared some population and job forecasts and also presented the idea of analysis at a sub area level and gave some teasers on that. And so we'll just kind of continue to pile on. Today, I'm going to focus on some of the real estate considerations in terms of the supply side of the analysis, and then the real estate demand. We focused on residential, retail, office, and light industrial, and then move into some of the final sub area opportunities. So we just really quickly to remind, I know we presented this at the last meeting, but I did want to kind of show. So we also, Kimberly, that was a good kind of lead up into this. We also do leverage the Esri Business Analyst format quite a bit. And so that's showing about just about 8,000 residents in that in the study area as was defined for the Inner Loop North. And what we did is we presented a low and a high forecast based on third-party sources that we were able to find that demonstrate a range of growth. And we like using a range, you know, particularly in this case where there's just a little bit of uncertainty. And I think that everybody is feeling a little bit more comfortable about what a recovery might look like coming out of the pandemic. And so we feel good with this range, but we do like the idea of being able to show kind of a low and a high of growth. And so this is showing the addition of, you know, 2,000 to, you know, 4,000 people over the next 20 years. And then the same thing for jobs. We used kind of a variety of sources. And at this point, we kept the job forecasts at the larger county level, just because, you know, jobs and employment economy tends to happen at a larger level. And so we took some captures from a demand perspective for job-based real estate sectors and brought that down to the study area. But at this point, we have jobs growing through 2040 to upwards of 398,000 up to over 400,000 jobs for the county as a whole. So stepping quickly through the different real estate sectors, wanted to start with just kind of an overall review of building permits. So this isn't necessarily housing units, so not necessarily all of these would get built over time, but it gives you a good indication of momentum in the sector. And what we see is something that's very consistent with urban markets, or, you know, an area around an urban core where, you know, pre-Great Recession, so before 2000, you know, late 2007, single family permits were at all-time highs, and multifamily permits were, you know, running fairly average. And then following the Great Recession, you know, we saw single family detached permits never quite recover to those pre-recession levels, but multifamily has done very, very well. And so this is just a good indication of kind of the momentum we're seeing in the residential market. This again is for Monroe County as a whole, but is kind of a nice indication of how this matches up with other national trends. So when we dive down and look at, this is for sale housing. So we're gonna look a little bit at what the housing study, or excuse me, what the price points look like for, on the top graph, for sale product. The median closing price in the city of Rochester, which was the smallest area that we had access to data for, is notably lower than what it is for the county as a whole. However, when you look at rental product, so typically defined as multifamily residential rental, those price points are very, very similar. So that premium that you see for county is not replicated in rental as it is in single family. Ultimately, single or rental apartments have a very healthy vacancy rate at or below 7%, which typically ends up being what is considered an industry standard for a healthy market. The report you'll see when you get a chance to review it does have a decent discussion about affordable housing considerations. This is going to be, you know, really important to consider, you know, in this area, given the dynamics of the population and the jobs in the area, and the idea of supporting existing residents. So, you know, wanting to understand those household dynamics, connecting jobs to shopping, to recreation, and the ability to provide multimodal transportation options. These are all things that the study area has as an advantage to it in regards to affordable housing. This plan, you know, as the plan continues to move forward and you consider land uses and conceptual designs, encouraging neighborhood stabilization for those existing residential units and neighborhoods in the area, and discouraging gentrification, identifying sites for new construction, as well as protecting that naturally occurring affordable housing that is critical for this area and needs to be one thing that's taken into consideration. And then finally, a focus on partnerships and the ability to leverage public investments. And that will bleed into some of the value capture work that we do here within the next 6 to 10 months. So just a few notes on the residential market considerations. Household formation is what drives demand for additional housing units, and the study area has demonstrated momentum in the ability to attract new residential product. Higher density multifamily housing is very attracted to areas that have accessibility to existing population centers, employment opportunities, recreation, nightlife, access to major transportation corridors. So we can check that box too. It's a strong performance sector here in the study area. The real estate performance is doing very well. The current vacancy rates are low and the rents are competitive that would be able to support future development. And when we think about COVID-19 and the impacts, while job losses and economic instability has, led to some increase in vacancy and rent concessions, we really feel that the housing market is actually going to come out of the pandemic, relatively quickly and in good shape. From a retail perspective, we did pull some existing retail. The study area has nearly 3 million square feet of retail, which is largely focused on food and beverage restaurants, consumer services, and grocers and food sales. And then what we found from the data that we were able to pull is that market-wide vacancy has gradually increased and is reaching about 14.3%. Rents have remained largely static in this area. We did prepare a leakage analysis, which is demonstrating that consumers are spending, far more in the area. Consumers who are in the area, whether they're living there or working there, are spending far more than the stores in the area are selling. And so that is indicating that people are going elsewhere outside of the study area to buy their goods and services. And those sectors that we're seeing the biggest leakage are food services and drinking places, restaurants, other eating places, food and beverage stores, so grocery stores, and a few others, but those top three are really making up quite a bit. So people are traveling outside the study area to find their retail goods and services. So from a market consideration, similar to housing, retail tends to be driven very much by rooftops. So as you add new rooftops, or in this case, because the study area is such a major job center, as you add more jobs, the demand for retail will increase. Experience-oriented retail has gained a significant traction in the market. So areas that are walkable and are connected, downtowns have been particularly successful in this. And so that's something that carries over well to the study area. And looking at COVID-19 impacts, retail is certainly something that has been impacted very significantly. Historic trends that have seen an upward trend in e-commerce and people buying things online has accelerated during the pandemic. We do think that's going to stabilize, but still it's only making up about 18% of total retail sales. And so there's still a place for brick and mortar stores, and that's for sure. From an office perspective, the vacancy rates for office in the central Rochester, which includes the study area, are high. The bad news of this graph is if you look at that vacancy rate in early 2020 at about 25%, that vacancy rate focuses on multi-tenant office space, so space that is leased. It is going to exclude buildings like the Kodak Tower, which would actually elevate the vacancy rate for this area overall. Average lease rates have remained relatively stable. When you look across the aggregate for entire central Rochester, just under $20 a square foot. We wanted to look at the total office inventory, but we also prepared a review of kind of the most competitive buildings, those Class A or Class AB buildings that are kind of achieving the highest rent premiums. And so when you look at those competitive buildings, which are represented by the blue dots here, they have just over 270,000 square feet of space. They have a comparatively lower vacancy rate at 14.7, much more healthy than north of 25%. And it shows a more varied range of average rent per square foot, but the overall average is exceeding $20 a foot, upwards of $25 a foot. So here's where we flip over to that conversation about employment, that, you know, demand for new office space is really driven by increases in jobs. And based on the forecast, we did see growth and momentum in job increases. And a lot of that momentum was in professional services, which are the ones that typically drive office space. Said this before with multifamily, location, location, location. Decision makers are starting to look more at where their workers are so they can be competitive in attracting skilled workforce. Downtowns have emerged as an important office location, given the live, work, play setting. You know, I'll say that, you know, when you think about COVID-19, one thing that you're hearing a lot is this return to kind of the submarkets, and is that going to suck, you know, the momentum that has happened from, you know, this momentum that's been established downtown? Is COVID-19 and the idea of having a little bit more space going to suck that momentum away back towards the suburbs? And we don't think that's going to be the case in the long term. There will be some right setting of office space as companies decide, do they need more space? I mean, traditionally, the square foot per employee has been gradually declining, and that may reverse some. There's also the increase in people working from home. And so while there may be some right sizing of the office market in the short term, in the long term, we do think that the office will return to where it was. I was actually on a ULI real estate trends call this morning, and they're suspecting that by 2022, we're going to see office demand exceed where we are again. So the recovery will come here shortly. And then finally, light industrial. This is a little bit of an odd one when you're talking about, you know, a pretty urban area. You don't typically think of light industrial as an active use, but you do have a core area of the study area that is, you know, is pretty industrial in nature. And so we thought it was important to discuss it as part of the market analysis. There's really not been a whole lot of new space completed in recent years. And the lease rates are lagging the larger market, which is maybe indicating that the product is starting to become a little obsolete. And so a few of the considerations that we have on that perspective is there is a, you know, e-commerce, as I mentioned before, is increasing. And so having that ability to get, you know, and fill that last mile gap, being close to customers, has driven demand for new industrial space, particularly light industrial space. There's concentrations of light industrial, they tend to cluster. And so you have a current cluster there. You know, how much more that will expand, I think, remains to be seen, but it is a job center and a creator. So it's something to consider as we think about new concepts for land use and alternatives for the alignments. And, you know, from a COVID perspective, this is the one area that does have that silver lining of good news, is that industrial and light industrial has done very, very well in the last 6 to 12 months. So finally, just to summarize our real estate demand across the sectors, and you'll see this in the report in all of its glorious detail. There's low growth and high growth scenarios were presented, and you can see the variations across the different sectors of what we think the study area could support in the future from a residential, retail, office, and industrial perspective. But we didn't stop there. If we head to the next slide, you know, we did talk a little bit last meeting about these sub areas and how it's important to discuss them just because they are so unique and different. You know, that southern piece is very urban. It is part of your central business district. And then, you know, between the Northeast, which is very residential, single family detached, your neighborhoods, The North Central is really a very mixed bag. And then your Northwest has, major employers, major anchors, but a lot of surface parking. They're all so unique. So we kind of pulled them out separately. And what we did is we kind of provided an indication of, short-term opportunity, which is the little fire, versus, it's going to take some more time, or is it maybe not an appropriate use for that sub area. And what this will do is, as Bergman, continues to kind of move forward in the conceptual planning and design phase, we will work with them to help them understand for these different sub areas, what are the types of real estate opportunities, what are those catalytic sites, and which uses will perform best, and how much land is really needed. And so this is kind of where we've ended up. There's much more detail in the report, and be happy to answer any questions if there are some.
Great, thanks, Jessica. There's a whole bunch of comments in the chat, and maybe we won't go through all of them, but we'll make sure we get all of those comments to you and all of those considerations. So I'll maybe just highlight a couple of the questions for you, and then if there's any others, we can certainly open the floor. But a question regarding, in the full report, is there attention given to owner occupancy versus rental as it relates to the residential sector?
Yeah, yep. It divides out, but not only in the demographics do we spend some time talking about the share of rental units versus the share of owner occupied units, but then when we talk about real estate as a whole, we spend some time talking about for sale as well as rental unit, rental multifamily.
Great. And then another question about how you've accounted for the conversion of office building supply into residential rental units.
Yes, that should have been taken into account in our numbers. There are, if you look over kind of the range of the last 5 to 10 years, there are what our data sources will do will actually create negative new constructions to account for those losses of former office space that is then converted into residential. Typically that net negative is offset by, some growth, but it is accounted for. They take it out of the inventory.
Great. Any other questions for Jessica at this point? Okay, so I think we're handing it back off to Mark at this point to talk through really immediate next steps as it relates to where we go from here.
Yes, thank you. I got to close out this chat session. A lot of good comments there coming in that we will address. So near term, we're looking for your help on, I believe these reports have been transmitted already to the Community Advisory Committee, but Darren can send them back out if you haven't received them. And we'd like your input back by the end of next week, next Friday, if possible, because we do want to move those draft reports along. As I mentioned, we've got the traffic data collection ongoing right now, and that will take right through Thanksgiving to obtain and compile and get it organized in December. And then we'll be back meeting with you to start talking about ideas the front end of next year. The racial equity subcommittee meetings, they'll continue. I think they're meeting about twice a month, which is pretty frequent. They have a lot of content that they're covering. Then we're continuing with the virtual stakeholder meetings with any opportunities to do in-person real contact when it's appropriate. Right now, we're still in the virtual mode for this. And then one of the real fun and exciting things is our coordination with the World of Inquiry and those bright young minds and getting the students integrated to our study and how the professionals at Bergman and our team work on studies like this. So that's going to be a fun, exciting aspect of what we're doing. And then I would think, like I said, to put on your radar, starting to vet alternatives in early 2021 and ideas and dreams and vision and wisdom and how we might shape those alternatives is welcome at any time. We don't have to wait until January. We're definitely going to develop our metrics for measuring the alternatives, and we'd love your thoughts on things we should be measuring when we're comparing ideas. If we're missing something, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you. I think that's it.
All right, is that the full presentation?
That's it.
All right, great. We can switch back to speaker mode. And I guess I will ask if there are any comments or questions from committee members that haven't been asked in the chat. Now would be the time to speak up. We've got about 15 minutes before we're scheduled to end, but we can always end early if desired as well. So if anybody has anything, please say so now.
Hey, Eric, it's Kim. I'm just interested to see how we're giving any consideration to green space and open space as we're moving forward when we're talking about design. Because I know that being a East End resident with very little remaining green space in place, that's a priority for our community. And, you know, as we're looking at design moving forward, how is that taken into consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. As we get into the actual creation of alternatives and begin to evaluate those, that open space will of course be one of those things to consider. Unlike Interloop East, you know, it's been pretty acknowledged early on that open space, both active and passive recreation, is a key consideration for this particular corridor. So ultimately, we don't know what the preferred alternative will be, and therefore we don't know exactly what the ensuing creation of new parcels or lands will be, if any. But certainly as we get into it and in coordination with public involvement and both the Technical Advisory Committee and Community Advisory Committee, we'll be looking to identify where are the best for where open space might be. I don't know if the consultant has anything more to add to that.
I would, this is Mark, I would tack on that the consultant team, actually from the first day we started gathering in the pursuit phase, you know, bringing, we've got some very high quality, high caliber community and urban design capabilities on the team with our sub-consultant members and with what Bergman possesses in-house. And we're really excited about recapturing lands and creating places. There was a word in the racial equity subcommittee presentation, build authentic community. I wrote that down. I said that's really a goal of ours and a passion. So, you know, we're going to look at the traffic aspects of this. I'm a transportation engineer, but creating quality space and community is really a goal.
Yeah, and Mark, I'll also just add, as one of the metrics that we're looking at as part of the multimodal evaluation, we're looking at both the amount of new space and then also looking at connections to that space, multimodal connections to those spaces as well.
May I ask, this is Karen, I'd like to know, I know that the traffic count that's going to be done is going, if I understand correctly, it's going to be done on the inner loop, counting motorized traffic on the inner loop. But have we ever, or is there a need to count how many people walk in that area? How many cyclists ride in that area? Is that a necessity? Is that, would it be useful? How much do people, do people other than motorized vehicles?
Yeah, we are doing, well, first of all, multimodal accessibility is a priority of this study. So
Right.
all modes of transportation, not just the motor vehicle.
Yeah, right.
And it's, but we're using the big data, the streetlight data to capture some very good information about mobility within the study area, whether it's vehicle or pedestrian bike. And we're going to do some spot counts of those activities also. So it's definitely at the forefront of our evaluation. The current counting is for vehicles. That's the plan, the current
Yeah.
thing. The study
Right.
itself is taking all modes into not just quantitative, but qualitative
Okay,
ideas.
thank you.
Mhm.
Another question, if nobody else is asking here. If we're looking at the surrounding areas as part of this target area, not just what might be infilled, are we looking at what it would take to make those neighborhoods strong? I'm thinking about the area to the north of the inner loop, adjacent to the south part, where Grove Place and East End is, that could really benefit from some infill housing and housing support for current residents, and kind of building that community up before you build something else adjacent to it that might draw people out of those neighborhoods.
Well, we've, I guess the answer goes yes. We met with, we've had a few meetings, one with the collective action project, and talked through with some of the residents up there what their goals for the project would be. And they talked a lot about one, and it's a shared goal for the project team as well, is to develop strategies to prevent displacement and to make sure that people who live in the neighborhoods in the project area can continue to live in the project area, and also a goal for home ownership, and to bring more owner-occupied housing to the community. And so, in trying to support community goals as we develop these alternatives and get to a preferred alternative, we definitely are looking at opportunities to strengthen the existing neighborhood.
I've got a question about commercial corridors. I know that the city has been very actively watching, looking, and targeting support in some years and creating opportunities to grow support for commercial corridors that are active, or at least have life in them. Does this, when all of this is filled in, are you guys viewing this as another commercial corridor? Or is it still, is that an issue that's going to be shaken out when alternative development models are presented, that some of them may tip more toward commercial corridor versus housing and services and institutions and things like that? What is your thinking regarding that question?
Well, the way I would look at it is, we don't yet know what will ultimately result. Are we going to have a new corridor with a new street, or is it actually something very different that we haven't maybe considered yet? But I do think we want to support and strengthen the existing commercial corridors we have. So we would want to use this, I think, as a tool to to do that, rather than to create more, I don't want to say competition, but create more opportunities. Let's focus on those areas that exist today, that are those well-established routes that people already are familiar with, and build them up and support them.
That was essentially at the core of my question. That's good.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
Okay, anything else from anybody else? I know we answered a few questions in the chats as well. I think we'll make sure that we transcribe those and make sure that they're also part of the record here. And if there's anything that wasn't answered, we will make sure we get back to you on any of those. So with that, and hearing seeing no other hands being raised, I believe we can thank you all for coming and for your participation and listening. I think Darren's going to get the reports out again, and make sure that you all have an opportunity to provide comment by about the end of next week. Would be very much appreciated. So again, thank you all for your time. Thank you to the project team for the presentation and all of the work that's been done so far. And we look forward to continuing the discussion. So thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.